Hello, everyone. You can't hear me. You can hear me because that's why I'm talking to you. You can't see me yet. Give me one sec. Give me one sec here. I'm sure this is going to, oh my Lord, that is the smoothest it's ever gone. Preeti, they can see you.
Hello.
And now they can hear you.
Hi.
Wow. Like everybody knows how I kind of have to curse at Zoom a little bit usually before I get it to work. But this time everything was so smooth. Now, give me one additional second and I'm going to pull up the window for my lovely chat, who I do not deserve. And then, boop. Fair warning, everybody in the chat knows already, I tend to do sound effects when I do things. I never did it before I had kids. And then I realized I was doing it with my boys when they were very, very little. And then I realized it's really useful because if you go, doop, and you're making noises that accompany what you do with children, they know to expect things to happen. And it eases back on a lot of the, it's effectively audience expectation, So I'm able to give them a tiny soundtrack. So they're like, whoa, why am I being picked up? It's like, and here we go. And they're like, oh, this is the picking up noise. So and now I do it all the time, including when I'm pushing buttons in my stream. So, so buckle in. This is kind of what you can expect here.
I'm so ready.
Okay. So, greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And also, greetings to those of you in the future who are watching the video on demand or on YouTube or like directly wired into your veins in the farther future. I feel very lucky today, and you will soon, I'm sure, feel lucky yourselves to be graced with the presence of a fabulous author that am just getting to meet today, despite kind of already being a bit of a fan. So, real briefly, first I'd like to start. Oh boy, I wonder if there's a way. There's so many clickety-clicketies from Slack coming through here. I don't know if I want to shut all of Slack down, but it's going to be like castanets in the background if I don't. You know what? I'm going to risk it. I'm just going to turn off Slack. Oh, I'm free. I'm free. Do you use Slack, Preeti?
I used to when I was like regularly freelancing, but now I don't have to anymore, so I don't.
Every once in a while, I realize I'm like, I am abandoning this communication platform, and it's such a relief. But then, of course, I have to pick up some other one to get things done again, and it's like, no, the chains. First and foremost, if you don't mind my asking, I have read your name. I've heard people talk about you. But ever since I really embarrassingly goofed up a friend's name when I first met him and did a little interview, Sandeep Parikh, and I goofed it so embarrassingly badly, I like to say, hey, I think I know how to pronounce this, and I've heard some other people say it. How do you pronounce your name, and how important is it to you, and how do you like to be addressed? So are you comfortable? Give me that. Sorry for being kind of an older white guy here.
No, of course. So my name is Preeti with like a soft T in the transliteration of my name from a non-Roman alphabet. We have two sounds, the t and the th. But when we transliterate, the single T is often a th sound. So it's Preeti with like that think or thumb sound, and then Chhibber, which looks far more complicated than it is.
Oh, and so it's Thibber.
Chhibber,
Oh,
like
it's Chhibber.
Chipper.
Okay.
Yeah, Chhibber.
Because I'm like, oh boy, I would have goofed that for real all the way. Also, give me one quick second. I'm going to do a slight tweak. The Zoom worked so well that I didn't fidget with it much, but I'm going to just do this a little bit, just a little bit. Nope, boy. See, this is now the next 45 minutes. Traditionally, this used to be the whole stream is me tweaking things and then making a hash of it. There we go. That's much better. Okay. So, so I'll also say, so let me try it if you'll forgive me here. See, now I'm feeling real performance anxiety.
No, you can do it. You can do it.
Preeti.
Perfect.
A little more T in there? Like a little.
No, that
Preeti?
was perfect.
Okay. Because, oh boy, I thought I shut down Slack, and apparently it is like a vampire and it refuses to die. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to close it.
Slack's revenge.
Oh, man. You could just quit. Just force quit Slack. Okay. So, I will say, if you don't mind talking about it, there's some things, and everyone has these things in their life where, and I also became aware of some of the phonetic stuff when my work was getting translated. And it turns out a name I put in my book, which I always thought of as Devi, and I put in, and I'm like, I made an interesting combination of letters. See, you're already laughing here, which is great because, like, you know where I'm going. I'm like, what a cool fantasy name I made, and then literally the first person who made an offer on my book, their name was
Davy.
Davy, which it isn't Devi or Davy like I would think it. I would pronounce it. And to be fair, in a secondary fantasy world, I get to do whatever I want. But then it turns out, yep, this is the name that super exists a lot. And it's traditionally a female name, which part of the reason I made one up is I wanted it to the Western eye and to the Western ear. It looks a little bit like it's like a devil without the L. And so it's non-gendered except for everybody who's more worldly than me. And so I met her and she's like, and I'm like, oh my God, am I going to look like I was sucking up? I put her in the book, but also like as a loan shark, like a kind of a vicious but cool person. I'm like, this would be such a weird hustle, like to do that. Okay. Hey, Preeti, Preeti, if you didn't notice, this stream is tagged with ADHD. Also, I'm recently diagnosed, and I'm so sorry. It makes for sort of good radio, so to speak, but I'm sorry if this is a little more scattered than I guarantee any other interview you will do on your upcoming book tour. So I am sorry for that.
No, I'm in for the ride. This is a good time. And also, can I say what's extra funny about this Devi thing than this idea of like devil without the L is Devi is like a goddess also.
Yep.
So you have like the
Yep. And it's like, and again, it's a much better name than I intended. Because like I've learned, and this is something I used to say when I still taught in a professional capacity. For a long time, I thought everyone should write a novel because it makes suddenly everything in the world is more interesting. Because, and like, I've learned so much about this world that I never would have encountered or had reason to care about. Like, now I know about like the 18 forms of address, like that happen in Japanese. Like when you talk, you effectively declare your social status. and I'm like, oh my Lord, like, how do I help this translator? Like, oh boy, what's the difference between translating and transliterating? Okay, got to get my head around this. I speak English and bad English, and that's it, I'm functionally illiterate in German, and that's pretty much English anyway, But okay, so I'm gonna get us on track here, he said with false confidence. Hey everybody, let's pretend we're just starting now. This will be our little secret. Hey everybody. Please welcome Preeti and her Fabuna book. See, I fancy. I got an ARC. Mm-hmm. Spider-Man's Social Dilemma. First off, would you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, and it can be from any angle. And since you see we're a little more relaxed here, you don't feel the need to only bring out like power play academical stuff. If you come in here and you say, I love butterflies and I collect stamps, my people will be here for it. So whatever you want to talk about, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I think the best way I've ever been described has been a walking exclamation point. I just like to be excited about the things I love. And I jumped from hyperfixation to hyperfixation, basically.
Oh, so when I mentioned ADHD, maybe you know a little bit about that too.
It rings a little true where you're like, oh, I really like this thing. Let me experience every single facet I can possibly like. Oh, there are 500,000 pages of fanfic. Excellent. One by one, we're going through them. But it served me well because it means that I've consistently just been loud about what I love and excited about what I love. And that led to me being able to write some of my favorite characters where they're like, oh, you like Spider-Man? Let me slide into that inbox and see if that's something you'd be interested in doing. And then I'm like, yes, let me write Spider-Man. Thank you.
Can I just say, loud about what I love, when you get business cards made, you could do a lot worse than that. Job description, whatever, vastly overrated. Contact information, it's just loud about what I love. Those are my favorite people. The next traditional thing I should ask is like, so tell us about your book. But I'm going to say, as an author, that question sucks, right? Like,
yes.
So how about this? I'm going to give the belligerent answer that I would never give on a press tour to sort of set expectations reasonably here. Because what I would never say, but what I wanted to say, and let's be fair, I did eventually start saying it, is they're like, well, so what's your book about? Or if even like a fan comes up to me and they're like, or not a fan, but like, they're like, hey, I saw you talk on a pet. What's your book about anyway? And I'm like, man, I am not interested in auditioning right now for your favor. And what I would say first is, there's a lot of people who've talked about it. They wrote reviews, I'm biased. Don't ask me, hey, is your kid cool? Yeah, my kid's cool. My kid's the best. But don't trust me. I mean, go out, and they're like, no, what it's about. And then what I would say was, if I could have just said what my book is about, I wouldn't have had to write 250,000 words. If I could say, it's a guy and he really likes pants, I'm like, oh no, I wasted 14 years of my life. If that's the moral of the story and I can sum it up that well, and like, oh, what am I doing? So what's your book about?
I feel like elevator pitches are the worst.
Give me your worst pitch. Give me the pitch that would make somebody tear up the contract they were about to ask you to sign. Let's do it that way.
Okay, worst pitch. Is it terrible that I'm like, no, but it's good.
And how about this? And this is a challenge. Worst true pitch?
All right. Worst true pitch is, have you ever wanted to relive your own awkward teenage years?
That is very good bad pitch. Yeah. But how about this? Rather than, because I was going to say, that's the second question. It's who are you? Tell us something about your book. And then, and then whatever. Maybe they talk about superheroes. They say, and then probably most interviewers would say, like, so what do you think about the new Marvel movies or something like that? It's very bubblegummy. Instead, I'm going to say, how did you get to this point where, what got you? Because for me, there's no real mystery. It's like, I'm a geeky, beardy, white guy who grew up playing D&D. So the question, why did you write a fantasy novel, is nonsense. It's like, read my bio, we're done. But like, what led you not to being able to write this, but wanting to write a book like this? So this is from a little bit about who you are. And you say a lot about what you love. What do you love?
I think what's fun is, I grew up at a time where we didn't have someone like Ms. Marvel, right? We didn't have Kamala Khan when I was growing up.
Right.
But we did have Peter Parker, and Peter Parker is, I think, the iconic, relatable superhero in that he's a disaster. Like, he's a complete and utter disaster, just constantly like not being able to pay his bills, making the wrong choices, and all of these things that are very relatable when you're a kid, when you're like, I too don't understand how to live life. But he can do it, and he can be a superhero doing it. And that to me allows for a lot of really fun opportunities while you're writing to make this character who, despite all of the horrible things that happen and the difficult and incorrect choices he makes, continues to try to be the best that he can be, which is the sort of aspirational aspect to it, right? So it's combining those. When I really mean it. Like, this book takes place when he's like 16. He's only been Spidey for a few months, and he's not good at it. And I got to pull that awkward teen self-sensibility into it to the point where sometimes I was like, this is too real. Like, this is too real for me.
Yep. So it being half past the hour, and also Preeti, I'm going to get it by the end of this. I'm going to do it intuitively. Do you have a hard out at 2?
No.
Okay. Or rather in half an hour, because we started a little bit late and I'm a little rambly and verbose. But since we're half past the hour, I figure you've seen the cover, everyone. You like Spider-Man. And so if you're interested, let me show you something real quick here, because and you're going to be off screen very briefly. If we come over here, and then I bicker briefly with my Chrome browser, everyone, and you're like, we're running what is called a capacity fundraiser. World Builders is a charity that I lied. I'm going to come back here. World Builders is a charity that I created by accident on my blog back in the day. And it was I thought, what if I brought my people along and we talked about charity and saw if we could do kind of a cool thing? And it turned out way bigger. And then next year, I thought, I wonder if we can do that again. And we did. And so over the last 10, 11 years, we've raised more than $15 million for various charitable causes, primarily Heifer International, which supports food sustainability all over the world, literally all over the world. It's my absolute favorite charity. We also have helped out Syrian refugees and hurricane victims, and promoted literacy and tried to get masks and stuff to marginalized communities during COVID. Generally speaking, geeks have good hearts and a lot of empathy. And so, but also geeks are smart, and you know that a lot of charities don't do what they say, or they're kind of scams or inefficient. And so a lot of y'all want to help, but you also don't want to be taken advantage of. So here at World Builders, we do a lot of research, and then we try to make it worth your while to do what you already want to do, which is make the world a better place. And at the end of the year, of course, we do our big fundraiser, but also we don't want to run just on volunteer labor. We want the people who work for us to have good lives and be able to buy food and pay rent and have insurance. And that means we have overhead. And so we do a mid-season fundraiser to help keep the lights on, so to speak. We have an online store where we sell stuff all the time, but partway through the year, now I'll head over here, we do something called Geeks Doing Good. And if you want to find it, there's this cool thing called Google. And if I type in Geeks Doing Good, and then, oh, look at this, it autofilled 2022. This year we're in now. And then Geeks Doing Good, is it right here? He said, clicking on it. Oh, that's from before. 2022. Where are we? This is 2021. You know what? I bet one of my fabulous mods has already posted many links in the chat here. So I'm just going to push that and get right there. As more and more people search, and as we spin up the fundraiser, it will be more easily searchable. Boop. Yeah, there's my sound effects again. I don't even think about doing it now.
I love it.
We have literally just launched, everybody. And we have some things here. We've, we're launching out with the Talent Pipes Pride pin because Pride does not just happen 1 month during the year. And so, and also, if you're like, man, I would love to buy that book, you can buy it here. We will ship it out to you post haste, and the proceeds. So not only do you get a cool book, but the proceeds from the book go towards charity. We've got other stuff here too, other books. You can, if you're like, well, I tend to buy ebooks, but I'd love to support you. We have some tiers that are just donations. You know, you can just put a little money in. We've got some copies of my books. And we will be adding things as time goes on, including, t-shirts and book bundles and games. So if you want to stay tuned in, you can always push this thing, and then, I don't know, you know how the internet works. You're watching Twitch. So you can follow this to see things that are updated, or if you're interested right now, come on in and jump on this book. Unlike Kickstarter, you can come in and buy multiple perks throughout our fundraiser and keep getting cool stuff. So don't think like, oh no, I got to pick one thing. The reason we do this on Indiegogo is because now you can come in and you can buy multiple things that you see throughout the year. Wes Chu will be on here tonight playing a game with us, and you'll be able to buy a copy of the first book in his new trilogy too. So that's sort of the excuse we have right now for doing interviews and promo, and I get to meet neat people and talk about writing and superheroes. So, Preeti, now we're back on screen. Just fair warning. What I would like to dig into a bit is, I want to go back to what you were talking about. The person you had was Peter Parker. And so that implies that like you've been doing comics kind of from when you were younger. I actually came to comics really late in my life. I was in my 20s before I sat down at a party and read Dark Knight, which shows you a lot about what sort of person I am and what sort of parties I went to. Where instead of dip, somebody had brought some comics and set them down. I'm like, great, I'm going to leave in my head for like 3 hours while everything is going on around me.
Wait, I have to tell you, the first college party I went to, the very first one, I disappeared, and this is so terrible, but I disappeared into the host's room for like an hour looking at his bookshelf, and I stole his Isaac Asimov short story collection.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And I will say, I guarantee, hey, everybody in chat, let's be honest. If you go to somebody's house, I think regular people, the thing you do is you kind of like look through their medicine cabinet. That's how you snoop. But not us, right? Like we all go to the bookshelves, and partly because we're curious, right? But maybe mostly because, like, I'm not saying we judge cruelly, but we are thinking thoughts about you and the sort of person you are based on not only the books there, but the way they're organized. Now this isn't a trap question or a trick question, Preeti, but if you went over to somebody's house and you saw their books were organized by color, what's your gut reaction? What would you think?
Okay, so prior to an experience I had where my friend, who is a graphic designer, came over to my house and did my bookshelf by color.
Oh,
she, like,
no!
Came in and did my bookshelf.
Hold on, with your consent though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, with my consent.
Okay.
It was like I had two bookshelves. I had like the one that had all of my books on it, and then the special one in my room that was like my favorite.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so she did the one of my favorite shelves because I know all those books so well.
Okay.
That, like, I don't necessarily need them to be organized by author because I've read them 8 billion times. So if I know what it looks like, for once I could be like, oh, it's the orange cover. It's the orange cover with the black text on it. And I know what that is. Prior to that, had I got into someone's house and had them like seen a bicolor bookshelf, I would have been like, they don't read. This is aesthetics. But after the fact, I'm like, well, I don't know why you did this. Maybe you just know your library really, really well.
I will say, did you leave it or did you put it back?
I left it.
You left it. I heard about, first off, it never occurred to me that a human, that a living actual human would consider. This was not a clickable option in my head before I heard somebody mention it. And then I thought, oh, well, you know, there must be somebody in the world who juggles ducks, but that person is not a normal person. And then I started getting into a fight with authors I respected. Mary Robinette Kowal, who I love as much as anything in the world, was like, I do this. And I am like, you don't, and you are just trying to get me upset because we're on stage right now. And this will be a fun argument, but right now we need to admit that you're just winding me up. And she's like, no. And I fought tooth. I put my flag in that hill and I'm like, here's where I die. This is not okay. And I need you to get help, you know? But the moral of the story is, everybody, for those of you out there who are sociopaths, it's blue on the spine. So if you need to flesh out the blue section, you know, not the most common, everybody has a lot of black, right? Over there's some white, but here's a nice blue right in the middle. But I'm so sorry. Let's get back to the book. Do the good pitch. Do the good pitch and say, this is, and how about this? I I'll do my real pitch that is not meant to sell the book, but it's the honest pitch that is so honest that it's embarrassing to say. I'll do it first.
Okay.
Because it's not a marketing pitch. And if somebody's like, why'd you write this book? And what's it about? And what do you hope to accomplish? And I would say, I read Cyrano de Bergerac and I cried my eyes out and I thought, I've read 4,000 fantasy novels. Why have I never felt emotions like this in the genre I love the most? And so I wanted to write something that centered around, that was not the same book that I'd read 1,000 times with slight variation, and that at the same time made people feel like they felt when they were a kid and they read Lord of the Rings for the first time, or whatever beloved book you read that was important to you. I wanted it to feel meaningful and important. I wanted it to center around people. I wanted it to not be cliche rehash. And I wanted it to be healthy and not promote toxic shit and not reinforce bad cultural things, and for people afterwards to have their lives be better because they read it. So it's like, which is wildly arrogant, arrogant and unrealistic and all of this stuff, right? That is what, and that's like, you don't say that to somebody because they're like, oh no, this person, bless their heart. What's your hook? What's your plot? You've told me nothing about this book, but that's what I did. So do you want to do a too honest pitch now that I've asked you for a bad pitch? Why did you do this one and what did you want to achieve? Or tell me anything about it that you love and you don't have to feel bad about loving your own book.
So I think that I'm actually similar to you in terms of comics. Like comics were difficult to get into when I was little. We didn't have a comic book store in my town. Like they weren't super accessible. And I came to Spider-Man and Peter Parker through like cartoons and movies and trading cards and video games and things like that. And so to me, what I wanted this book to be was a point of accessibility. I think Spider-Man is a character people deeply love, and it's a character kids deeply love. And one of the best things, and what I hope comes from this, is that a kid who's just seen Spider-Man and knows he's a superhero can pick this book up and not need to have read 800 issues of Amazing Spider-Man to connect to the character and not feel, silly or stupid for not knowing things. And so it was very important to me to have this book exist as a way for anybody, whether you love Spider-Man or you don't love Spider-Man or you don't know Spider-Man, to be able to pick up and enjoy it, because I don't think we should ever gatekeep anything. I think people, like when I say a lot about what I love, it's brought me such joy that I want to be able to do that for everybody, and anybody who picks up my books to be able to experience that same level of like excitement and joy that I do thinking about this character.
And let me see, we should, because the book isn't out yet, we should keep this spoiler free, which is tricky. Because, of course, how about this? So that we can all be on the same page and we will have a taste of the shape of the story. Because that's why pitches are important. Mm-hmm. Is somebody's like, eventually we all realize, I went from being 13, which is like, is there a sword in it? And that means, yeah, I'd read it. And I could read 3 books a day because I had nothing else going on in my life. But eventually you're like, I only have so many hours left, And I'm like, what? And it's not even so much what book is going to get my $7. It's what book is going to get my 2 hours,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we can talk about that. But what I'm going to do, I'm old. Give me a sec here. Now, your back cover copy, mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
I feel good about it. I
Okay.
helped write some of it.
Oh,
So
good,
I'm
good.
pretty happy with it.
Okay. So I know sometimes people are like, it's great, you know, but it's like they didn't have a say, or their say was ignored. They're like, bless your heart, you're not marketing. We're going to write the back cover copy. So here we go. I'll do movie voice, everybody.
Yes.
In a world. No, that's
That was amazing.
Peter Parker has been swinging and thwipping his way through New York City as Spider-Man for just a few months, and balancing his double life is complicated. He goes to school and tries not to embarrass himself in front of his crush, MJ. He takes photos for the Daily, I was going to say Bugle. It's the Daily, I would read the Daily Beagle, and tries not to embarrass himself in front of his boss, J. Jonah Jameson, and he fights crime in the evenings. And, well, he's kind of always trying not to embarrass himself. Easier said than done when you're a teen with spider powers you're still getting used to. On top of all that, the notorious villain, the Sandman, is it the Sandman or is it Sandman?
I think it goes back and forth.
Yeah, the superlative is always tricky. On top of all that, the notorious villain, the Sandman, is acting more strangely than ever. Social media seems to be taking a toll on MJ, and someone keeps trying to steal an artifact that's supposedly powered by alien matter, which can't be good. Something eerie is going on, and Peter is determined to figure out what it is before things go from weird to dangerous. Oh, and here we go. Told with Preeti Chhibber's incomparable voice, which balances wit and charm with teenage earnestness and vulnerability, this series is full of action, adventure, humor, friendship, and, of course, heroism. That's pretty good copy.
Hey.
And so, the thing that I noticed and I appreciated right off the bat is, you know, we as somebody who lived through the dark times where there were no fantasy movies hardly, let alone comic book movies, and the few we had were embarrassingly terrible. You know, like drunk uncle who only shows up for Thanksgiving, terrible. Like y'all kids don't know how good you have it now. Go and find the original Captain America, you know? Like, oh my Lord, it looks like some kids did it in their garage, and that was supposed to be a real superhero movie. Of all of them, Spider-Man has gotten so much movie and then re-movie and then re-movie and then re-hero and re-hero. And as much as I appreciate Spider-Man, and I will say Spider-Man, because I didn't start with Spider-Man, way back out of my library, I read random issues of Doctor Strange and Green Lantern. So they have like a little bit of nostalgia. And then later, because that's what people gave me, I read Batman and, you know, some of the classics and Alan Moore and whatever. But I've always been like widely sporadic. I've never really followed one thing. You still know Spider-Man, because at this point, Spider-Man, especially after these movies, he has moved from, in my opinion, the realm of straight up owned IP fictional character. And he is about 2/3 of the way to myth, where at some point, like they're, you know, Sherlock Holmes that was just in the books written by Doyle is different from Sherlock Holmes that now exists in the cultural landscape, because there's been so many different interpretations. And so Sherlock Holmes is farther on that path to being like Gilgamesh or
King Arthur.
King Arthur, perfect, or Robin Hood, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because the truth is, everybody, even if they don't care about superheroes and have never watched the movie, they know Peter's origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, I love that you did not do it. Like, can I ask why?
I didn't want to.
Good, best reason ever.
I think to your point is like everybody knows it. And if you don't know it, there's enough reference to it in the book that you'll pick up on what it is. But one of my big influences for this book was this comic run that came out in like 2014 or 2015 called Spidey by Robbie Thompson. And it's so good. It's like for kids. It's like another one of those like accessibility points, like little vignettes. Each story stands on its own. And every issue just started with like a 1-pager of like, here's your origin story. And then it got it out of the way. Like it was just like, here you go, setting the scene, done. Let's move on to what we want to talk about. And I really appreciated that, where I was like, this is great. We don't need to rehash this. Like, we're fine. We're A-okay.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, typically like heroes, especially like comic book heroes, the origin story tends to be one of the only fixed points, because they are like restarted or retconned. But so the one immobile point in their story is that origin, which is such a limiting factor in terms of their growth as characters. Because like, it's like, how did Robin Hood get started? It's just Robin Hood,
Right.
It's like Robin Hood isn't defined by his origin. Now, he has an origin that is typically understood, but only a few characters are defined by their origin. Like, I mean, in some ways, I'm going to shame myself. It's Athena, right? Fully formed from the head of Zeus.
Yeah.
That's an origin story. That's interesting, right? But that's not not every Athena story starts there, because she's cool as hell. So I do think that you have the freedom to now, you have no longer an obligation to say, okay, there's a boy, about boys. New York, about New York. Okay, but superpowers. How do I make this make sense to people who don't know about? Everybody knows about superhero. Everybody knows about Spider-Man. Everybody knows Radioactive Spider. And while it is sort of interest to see the variations on a theme, if you're like really into cultural meta-narrative, like some of us, right? But at the same time, I'm like, yeah. Can we get to the good stuff? I want to see the character. I want to make this protagonist protag for me. So if that is what you didn't, oh boy. And I keep wanting to say favorite scene. I keep wanting to say whatever. But without straying into spoiler, is there something that, and again, we can do this. I'm going to give you the chance to do it, because like as an author, what I always thought is, do you read Neil Gaiman? Do you read? So Neil Gaiman, I think all of us in the world, we have a couple people that we can never be cool about, you know?
Oh, yes.
And like, and Neil Gaiman is one of those people for me, right? Such a fan, admire his work, even though like I've met him and we know each other a bit. And now I can be a little cooler. Like a significant portion of my brain is always devoted to like not freaking out.
You're like,
yeah, like 80% of my brain is like, don't. You be a person here. Don't.
It's so hard to be a person.
Don't embarrass us. It's very Spider-Man. See, this is relevant.
Yeah.
Don't you embarrass yourself in front of Neil Gaiman. And so to the extent where there's pictures of the first time I met him, and I look like I've been struck in the head with a brick, because everyone else around him is like, I get to meet Neil Gaiman. And I'm like, I look like I've been
too
drugged.
far the other way.
Oh, it's like I've put a straitjacket on my own brain. Because and here, I think this is very relevant to this sort of story, because when you are young, you go from this magical realm of no one exists but me, around one or two, and that continues about up till 4. And if you've ever met a little kid, there's something absolutely wildly, numinously magical about them. And it's that they can have no ego or pretense.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere around 4.5, they become aware that people watch them, or maybe that there are people to watch them, and they want attention. And as soon as that happens, it's like, now it's gross. Before, when you didn't care, it was cool. But now you're mugging for this, and it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of progresses. And then you realize around when you're a teenager, and you realize that if you want to be seen as cool, that means you don't care.
Right.
You need to pretend you don't care. Nothing bothers me. I'm not that into anything. I only like things ironically. But what that is it's a type of fear. What are you talking about, Rothfuss? What I'm talking about is, whenever people would approach me about my book, and they'd say, I loved this bit where you did, and what I feel like I should do if I wanted to be like Neil Gaiman, because then I'd be like, oh, I'm so glad you like that, but I'm not. And what happens is if somebody comes, they're like, that time when this thing happened, and instead I'm like, yeah, wasn't that cool? Except I wrote it, so that feels weird, except...
No, it's not weird. It's awesome.
Good. Thank you. Because I need that. I tell other people that, but I need to hear it myself because I do feel weird about it. And I wish we could do that about your book without being spoilery. Can you tell us, and this is a safe space, and no one's going to judge you for being like, I did this thing and I'm so proud of it and here it is. Can you tell me a couple of things that you did here or that you got to do that you didn't think they'd let you do? Or where you're like, boy, I stole a march on him there, or ooh, I've always wanted to. Can you talk about that process at all?
Sure. What's nice is my editor, who worked on this book, Emily Julin, was amazing. Like, there was never a point where she was like, no, you're not allowed to do that. She's like, let's figure this out in a way that will work. Because obviously it's IP. I'm playing in someone else's sandbox. There are plenty of people I wanted to put in the book that they were like, no, you're not. No, you can't do that. But what was nice is from the get-go, the minute that this was a reality that I could write a Spider-Man book, I was like, it needs to be a Peter Parker and Mary Jane story. It's not just a Peter Parker story. Like, the book won't work if Mary Jane's not in it, which was really, really important to me, that she have her own story. She have her own life that exists outside of Peter, but it's still like a cute little romantic comedy. And so that's actually how I pitched it. I was like, it's a slice of life Peter Parker, Mary Jane rom-com.
That's a good pitch. That you're way better at that than I ever was.
I was like, they're gonna say no to this. But then they said yeah, and that's sort of one of my favorite parts about it, is like how important she is to the plot and how important their relationship is to the plot. Like, that was really fun for me.
So you mentioned, were there some things you threw out that they're like, no, sorry, you can't?
A lot of it were cameos from other characters. Like, they were just, like a lot of it were, I think, very, very early pitch on, I think I had like a big Sinister Six showdown at some point, and they were like, you need to, like, and they were right, to their credit. Like, that was too much for this book.
It is interesting because I know sometimes also when somebody's doing a comic and you're playing in that IP, they're like, we need you to put this in because we want to raise awareness of this character. And this is not a new thing with the Marvel movies and whatever. No. That's always, so yeah, I understand that. And again, the only work in the what's it called? It's contract work is it's almost right, but that sounds super gross.
It's like a work for hire sort
Right.
of like, but it's like, yeah, no, I agree with you.
Playing in somebody else's playground. Like the one that I did like that was, and this is when I agreed to do it, Rick and Morty was not quite what it is now. Like there's parts of Rick and Morty that I feel are genuinely brilliant. However, the people that like Rick and Morty have increasingly made me feel bad about liking Rick and Morty. But I got the chance to do a D&D Rick and Morty crossover. So 2 IPs at once, that I was sort of negotiating with. And the thing is, my initial pitch, I'm like, well, let's kill this. Let's put a bullet in the head of this thing right now. Like, here's my pitch. We're not doing this. We're not doing this. We're not doing this. And I'm like, Rick isn't the hero because he's never the hero. And I'm going to pound the nails into that coffin so solid nobody can fight me on it. And I'm like, bang, 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 bang. And they're like, cool. And I'm like, oh, God, okay. And I also found it very disturbing that I was really good at writing in Rick's voice, which I'm not comfortable about at all. But that's easy, because he is a terribly broken sociopath of a human. But then I'm like, and then he gives people the finger, and they're like, no giving the finger. And I'm like, oh my God, have you seen the show? Like, how can I not give the finger? How can he not cuss? Which they did let me cuss, but you have to asterisk it out. And I'm like, this is weirdly, like, you let me absolutely like lean on these character concepts, but you're not letting me do the things they actually, it was a wild thing. So what, as opposed to, let's keep in here. Were there any like little things that came back? Because we can talk about that without getting into the realm of spoiling the book, but it also gives people a peek into your creative process about like, I kind of wanted to do this. And everyone who's outside of it is like, oh, they wouldn't let Rick give someone the finger? Like, that is, if there was a character Bible, that's his third item.
That's his thing.
Rick gives everyone the finger.
I think what's funny is like this book actually not so much. What's great about Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and it's like, upper middle grade, is that he's a little bit of like a nice guy character, right? He doesn't do a ton. I will say I wrote a tie-in to Spider-Man Far From Home, which is the second MCU Spider-Man movie, called Peter and Ned's Ultimate Travel Journal. Now, obviously, they were far more strict there because I was literally playing with someone else's iteration of this character. So I wrote the manuscript and I sent it in. And in the manuscript, I had this bit about Peter's bad jokes, because Peter Parker my Peter Parker, the Peter Parker I love, tells a lot of bad jokes. And I got the note back that was like, Peter doesn't do this. And he doesn't. In the MCU Spider-Man, that's not his shtick.
Oh, hold on. You're right.
I know.
That's wild. I was right? Like, how dare they? Oh, no, wait.
But they're right. And I had this like moment where I was like, oh, right. Okay. This is your Peter Parker, not necessarily my Peter Parker. And it like I went through the same thing. I had to sit down and be like, okay, hold on. Because like Tom Holland, I think, is so charming in the role.
Man,
and he like works really well. And so I think they benefit a lot from his delivery is really strong. And so it can still be very funny and very Spider-Man. But that he does not do that thing. He does not have his quippiness. He's not
snarky.
Right.
He's too earnest to be sort of defensive in that way, because
Yeah.
that's absolutely a teenage sarcastic defensive
Right?
thing you do. Wow, see, I'm so glad I asked, because that's delicious to me. Um, so, how would, and I'm going to throw this open to the chat in a moment. So tee 'em up, chat. We're gonna open things up to your questions, because I will admit I've been selfish here, because I just really wanted to ask some stuff. With what did you want to? Because sometimes some of it you just do because you're like, well, this is Peter Parker, but you knew that you were getting to do your own iteration.
Yes.
So, how is your Peter Parker unique? That's one of those that feels gross, because that's like a real interview question where it's like, it's almost like coming at you. It's like, but how is yours? Prove yourself. I'm not doing it that way, but I'm like, I want to know, what did you pick for doing it that way?
I think for me, one, this is, I want to say, I think I am maybe probably the first Indian American person to write Spider-Man, which was like wild and very exciting to me to participate in this story. And so bringing that sort of like unique cultural perspective to it was really fun. And then two, it's one of the first like prose Spider-Man stories, like that is just words on a page, which turns out limited amount of ways you can say shoot a web.
Right.
Which is a fun lesson to learn when you're writing fight scenes. And so that was fun, because I got to be in his head much longer, I think, than comics gets to be. Like, it wasn't the little like caption box with the Spider-Man. It's just like constantly every line is Peter's perspective, is from his head for when we're in his POV. And that, I think, by nature has to be unique, because we're spending so much time with him.
Yeah.
Like, just him. And so bringing that sort of like depth onto the page was both terrifying and fun, because we get to not only see that defensiveness and that snark come through his dialogue, but also like where it's coming from emotionally consistently.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, for those of you that are not ancient like me, in the way back comics, because when I started to get into it, I'm like, I would go to the comic store and I'd be like, oh, wow, they have like the classic Fantastic Four. And it's cheap because it's a reprint of this old 4-color from the 60s. But it's like, I'm like, okay, like, I'm curious, like, show me what you got. And it's a little bit like when you go and you read a Victorian novel. And I'm like, or even, bless his heart, Tolkien, who I grew up with, and I have a special fondness for. But it's like, Granddaddy Tolkien, we all owe him a debt. But he does go on a bit about the springy turf. You know, there is a lot of description, you know, that is not fashionable now. You know, and it stems from a different writing tradition. Or if you read a Victorian novel, you're like, boy, you were classically educated. Boy, you really love slipping in some Latin. Boy, it's like the semicolon lobby really bought you, didn't they? Like you had a big old bucket of semicolons and you wanted to use them because they were cheap. But that was not notable. That was the done thing. And in comics, what it is, or back in that time, it was entirely in the minds of the characters, where and it was very clunky storytelling. But the assumption was you might have bought this for a dime, not have read any other of the comics, not have read Spider-Man, but you were going to get on a bus and read a weird story. And so you stop by the newsstand and you pay a dime for a thing that you're going to throw in the garbage. And they needed to make sure that even though this was in the middle of a fight or a mystery or whatever, so Spider-Man was always, or, you know, to pick he will he'll do something, and then he will think to himself, it's a good thing that I reloaded actually, no, that's way too much credit, because that would do it. He's like, I'm going to use the web shooters that I myself developed because I love science a lot. He's thinking that in the middle of a fight, and you're like, yeah, dude, you've said that. You've thought that. First off, nobody thinks that to themselves. And this is awkward, and it's very texty, but as an author, I know why that's there. But still, I'm like, this is bad storytelling. But you have the opportunity to do so much more with that, living behind the eyes of this character. And which I feel a texty thing, a novel is the way to really learn about other people. It's the key to empathy. Yeah. And hearing you talk about that specifically, I love. Okay. I've indulged myself more than I ought. Now, how about this? Also, because I know I do it sometimes, I get excited and I springboard off something you said. Is there anything I've asked you about and you were like, ooh, I'll mention these two things, and after one, I jumped in? Is there anything you're like, I want to finish this story? Because I will also, when I'm caffeinated like this, I'll talk over somebody and I really feel bad afterwards.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I feel like I got it all out.
Okay. Then I'm going to throw it open to the chat here. Here's the rules. We're not going to stray into the realm of spoiler, but so long as you're not saying, because we got a little taste of the plot when I read the back. This is the shape of that story. We know sort of genre and tone, but don't specifically ask for things that might be spoilery. And let's not do huge multi-part questions, like nothing that your freshman English teacher would make you fill a whole blue book on. Let's do one at a time questions. Otherwise, it gets a little muddy. Otherwise, how has, are you doing touring for this?
No, I am not. I'm doing like virtual stuff.
Cool.
So I have like one local event set up in Atlanta. If you're in Atlanta, Little Shop of Stories, which will be fun in Decatur. And other than that, it's going to be kind of virtual Zoom events, as is the norm these days.
Man, and I'm glad, having done book touring, some of it is nice, but boy, given COVID and everything, I'm really glad you don't have to.
Yeah, that's definitely the anxiety point.
Okay, now we got these questions rolling in. If your Peter Parker could have a team up with any Marvel character, who would they choose? Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, okay, it's so hard. And normal circumstances, I think I would say Kamala Khan, but Eve Ewing wrote a team up for Peter Parker and Kamala Khan, which is one of my favorite Spidey stories and Ms. Marvel stories. Definitely check it out. So I feel like it would be really fun. I always love when Spider-Man ends up with the X-Men because it's always a good time. But my Peter Parker with like a Gambit would be such a delight, because I feel like he would just really be floundering, but Gambit could also be a little like, this is how you act cool. Let me show you.
That would be funny. That would be funny. Okay. I'm going to skip around here a bit. Here we go. So somebody says, brainstorming, free writing, practice unpublished fanfic. What was the first moment you really felt like you got the voice of Spider-Man? Was there a point writing this or something else where you're like, where it kind of, you realized that it had clicked together for you?
I think when I was writing my first long pitch, I had done a few short sentences with my editor about what I thought the book could be about, but then I had to write, I think it was a 7 to 10 page, like real, what is this book about? And that was where the tone hit really well, I think, and where I was like, oh, this is what the book could sound like. And this is who Peter is, was at that point, which was probably July or June 2019.
That also gives y'all an idea of how long these things come
Yep.
to fruition, everybody. Just and actually that is a pretty fast from pitch to shelf. That is really pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody here says, this is, and so somebody says, so this is not just one book, it's a series?
It's a trilogy.
Trilogy. Gotta love that trilogy. And then somebody else says, how do you feel about a sort of a love triangle between Peter, MJ, and Black Cat?
I love Felicia Hardy. Like, I love, like, obviously, like Mary Jane, Peter, Ride or Die, my OTP, whatever. Not because I don't think Black Cat warrants the romance. I think Felicia is too good for Peter.
Oh,
like, I think,
ow.
like, legit, I think she's too, maybe I shouldn't say too good. I think she's too much for him. Like, she is one of my favorite characters. I think she is so smart and so funny, and I love where she exists on that sort of like good, bad. I got to write a Black Cat short for Women of Marvel that came out this year, and it was so fun being in her head when you're sort of like, I don't have to be good. Like, I don't have to do things for anything other than my own purposes. And yeah, I love it, but I think she is, while I love her romance with Peter, I think she's so fascinating and so fun on her own. Like, I'm okay with either.
Okay. So I also say, because I didn't do it at the top of the hour, hey, everybody, we're here talking books and comics and character and writing, but also we are sort of promoting a charity event. If you'd like to help make the world a better place and at the same time maybe buy a cool book by an author you've just sort of met and they seem cool and smart and funny and all of those, every good thing. If we go back to here, you'll see this is called Geeks Doing Good. And we'll be running this for about a week. There's a bunch of different things you can buy. There's copies of Spider-Man Social Dilemma, as well as some other things, or you can just donate, or other books. And we are going to be adding things like every hour of every day moving forward. So if nothing else, if you swing by and you're like, I don't know about right now, but you hit this follow, you will be able to come back and get updates and check it out as things continue. We literally just launched an hour ago, and we're going to be rolling out more and more stuff all throughout the day. Okay, back here. That was a pretty concise pitch for me. And so now... Oh, this is a good one. Is your book readable for an intermediate English learner? Or do I have to wait for a Portuguese version? How is the language? I know this is written middle grade, so you're probably not really elaborate or convoluted in your sentence structure.
Nope. I think an intermediate. I mean, I'm not super familiar with what the term technically means, but this book is targeted at sort of like a 10 to 14 age range here. So like 5th to 9th grade-ish reading level, I guess. I do think it's fun for all ages, but that is who it is written for.
Cool. Now this is interesting, and you can simply say spoiler if you want. Mm-hmm. But this I feel does give a perspective on the story, because we already talked about, like, you've kind of hopped over the straight up origin. But the question is Uncle Ben in this story?
He is not.
Okay. So, that part of the origin is already done. Which, you know what? No, I'm not going to ask a question of my own. I'm going to focus on the chats. And here's an interesting one for me. This is somebody in the chat for the first time. Glossy Wombat is a very good username. And this is a question that I think is deeper than a lot of people might think. Does Mary Jane really need to be a redhead?
I don't think so. I think that one, I don't know what the reasonings were at the time, but I'm sure color choice and printability had something to do with it, would be my guess, knowing what we know about how Marvel was run at the time and how printing worked at the time. I think Mary Jane, to me, from what's great about comics is, while yes, there are certain truths that exist for these characters, they are incredibly malleable because so many different creators have a chance at writing them. You get to sort of decide what creator you connect with and whose rendition you connect with. Like, what really works well for you might not work for another reader, and that's okay. And so for me, Mary Jane, the way I see her is it's all about her attitude. It's all about how she approaches problems and how she approaches her relationship with Peter and how she goes through the world. She is a redhead in my book, but I don't think she has to be a redhead.
And the reason this one is interesting to me, and I'm torn here because we could hit a few more little kind of popcorny questions before we're done, or we could kind of dig in here, and this does deal with what you just brought up, which is these characters are not one thing, and so I know there was a lot of discussion a while back about Sherlock Holmes, and somebody said, because now he is in the public domain, which means anybody can take a shot. But there have also already been versions of him done other than Arthur Conan Doyle. So many, like in movie or TV shows. And I think Laurie King wrote a really good series of books. But I'm wondering, was he out of copyright then? Or did she get permission from the estate? I don't know. But the one of the discussions that happened within, I don't know, probably the last 6-7 years is people are like, does Sherlock Holmes need to be British? And because the original was, and most of the follow-ups are, but what they've done is, in telling new stories as opposed to retelling the old ones, they've brought him into the modern day.
Yep.
So that shows that, well, if it's still Sherlock Holmes, he does not exclusively exist in that time period. That means that he is not he does not exclusively wear a deerstalker cap. And it's like, and so in some ways they're almost testing a theory about how much can you change Sherlock Holmes before he's not Sherlock Holmes, which to me, as from a philosophy or a scientific angle, you do come down to, it's what is the essential characteristics? Yes. What are the things that if you change them, it is no longer Sherlock Holmes? Because I think we can agree that over here is cool, Cumberbatch, modern day, still Sherlock Holmes. Over here, it is a brick with a wig that I call Sherlock Holmes. Does that work? Let's say, for the sake of argument, no. That means there is some point at which it becomes not Sherlock Holmes. And I know one of the big kerfuffles, and it's also Doctor Who. It's also a lot of these things. And it's does he need to be a white dude? Does he need to be a dude? Can Doctor Who be a woman? Can Sherlock Holmes be a woman? And that's where it starts to get fraught. And so, like, I think we can agree, MJ, and here's how I'm gonna turn this back towards your thing. MJ is a redhead in your book.
Mm-hmm.
What, in your opinion, if you changed it about MJ, would make it not MJ anymore?
I think if it's a character who becomes vapid and mean-spirited, you know, just a cool girl for the sake of being a cool girl, I think you've lost some of that. What I like about Mary Jane, and what I find for a more modern version of Mary Jane to be true. But I also think that it's so funny. James Whitbrook over at IO9 wrote this piece a few years ago on canon and our sort of obsession with canon, and how it makes it harder to enjoy story when you're obsessed with this notion of canon. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think story is malleable. I think that especially with these legacy long running characters, like, yeah, Sherlock Holmes and a brick, like as a brick with a hat on, might not work, but if somebody does it, they do it, right? Like, it doesn't work until it does. And so it depends on the reader. It depends on how they manage to tell that story. Like, I don't know if you saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, but it's new.
What is that? Why does
it's the new Michelle Yeoh multiverse movie.
Yeah.
And that, it's so good. It's so good. And not to spoil anything, but there are these, they sort of show how she exists in a million different universes, and what truths there are and what truths there aren't are. And I think that that's sort of how I find to be the most compelling way to approach sort of legacy characters is change as much as you want. The people will, like, readers will respond or they won't. And that's how we'll know it can work. And if it works for you as a creator, great. But if you want it to work for readers, it might need to exist a certain way. It's the possibilities, I think, are endless for characters who have so much story in their history. Yeah.
What do you think? I love that answer about if MJ was this, she wouldn't be MJ. And I think, honestly, that's where this whole multiverse what if, because I think a lot of people would be like, ooh, I want to do Superman except ... Yeah. And they're like, boy, we'd love to work with you. Boy, that would be a cool story. But we need to, like, for them, Superman is a commodity. And they're like, we need to maintain the brand purity of Superman over here. But you can do a what if. You can do an other verse, or, you know, they've always come up ways to tell these other ones. And I think typically if they shunt it into something there, it's sort of like, cool story, not this, you know? So if you were going to, so I think, like, if you were in the multiverse, you could run into a mean MJ.
Yeah, totally.
But I think that it's only works because it's like, oh,
in the context
of, like, that's the exception that proves the rule that MJ is, you know? Similarly, what do you feel is core for Peter? It's not Spider-Man if it's not.
It's not Spider-Man if it's not with great power comes great responsibility, right? It's not Spider-Man if he's not making those hard choices. The Spider-Man PS4 game is my favorite Spider-Man movie. And it opens, it's so good. And it opens with the most Spider-Man thing where he's standing in his apartment and you see sort of like an eviction notice slide under the door, and he looks at it. And then he looks outside where the sirens are going off, and he makes a choice, and he leaves to go deal with whatever the big problem is. And then he gets evicted. That is Spider-Man. It's making the hard choices of sacrifice to do the right thing. And so without that seed, he's not Peter Parker.
Do you think you could have a Peter Parker where Ben doesn't die?
Well, so yeah, I think so. I think
so too.
It doesn't I think he has to understand loss. I think there has to be a level of like whatever that could mean. That doesn't have to mean death, but there has to be some understanding of loss and grief.
See,
But
and this is interesting because, and here, this would be our podcast. Is
yeah.
I want to now talk for an hour just on this one fine point, because I think Peter needs to learn. But where I get bogged down in my writing is I'm like, not what am I? First, it needs to be entertaining, needs to be coherent, needs to hang together. All of those, you need to tell a good story. But then on the other side, I'm like, you know, does this imply that you can only learn an important lesson through loss? And I, as a pedagogue, I hate that idea. You know, what if, I mean, you know, it's sort of like, now I would argue that Batman, yes, you can't have Batman if Batman's parents dying, spoiler alert, is probably central to, oh no, I'm going to get banned from Twitch, is probably central to Batman.
Yes.
But I would argue, like, I would love to see a Peter Parker. Like, I do not think people need to be miserable to learn. And I think that's a trope in the culture that I'm always scared of perpetuating.
Well, so what the MCU did, actually the MCU's trilogy of Spider-Man movies, I think is amazing, because I think they did that, right? Like, they don't start off with the origin story in that first movie. And when finally No Way Home came out, you kind of realize that they've revamped the Spider-Man origin story. And some people hated it and some people loved it. I loved it, because Peter was Spider-Man for 2 movies before we see him go through that grief and go through that intensive loss that pushes him to become kind of the Spider-Man I love, which is that like isolated, doing good despite hardship sort of moment. But prior to that, he's Spider-Man with having great friends, with having a support system, with having Uncle Ben's not there, but we don't know what happened. Clearly, whatever, it wasn't the same origin story because of what happens in No Way Home. So like, I think they did that in a really interesting way where we do get to see him still do the right thing despite not having learned it from a specific pain point necessarily.
Yeah. Preeti, I have enjoyed this so much, and I could talk for forever about this stuff with you. This has been such a delight. Thank you so much for helping us kick off the fundraiser. Everybody, we have, and I'll let somebody drop the link in the chat here. You can pick up a copy of her book over at Geeks Doing Good and support a good cause at the same time. There's other stuff over there, and other stuff will be added soon. Let's, you know, and I don't know how to put a button on this other than I do. Where can people find you? If they're like, I dig this person. You know, I always hesitate to say, are you on Twitter? Because, oh, what a cesspit. Is there a better place for them to get more of you? Where would you prefer them to show up?
I am on Twitter at Run with Skizzers, Skizzers, but also I have a few podcasts. Desi Geek Girls, which is like a pop culture podcast through the lens of South Asian Americans, and then Tarval and Our Bust, where my friend and I are rereading the Wheel of Time books slowly, if that is up your alley. And so, yeah, those are kind of the 3 best places, Twitter and those 2 podcasts. Awesome.
Thank you again so much. Thank you, chat, for showing up and for your good questions. And I'll be back later. We're going to play a game with some cool people. The game is amazing, and it focuses on world building and storytelling. So if you're here and you enjoy this, you'll probably enjoy that too. Please check out the Indiegogo, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.